Hey, it's Rachel. We have used a variety of different non-chemical weed control methods as we have been establishing the garden this year, and I wanted to quickly run through the different types, their pros and their cons, and where I recommend using each of them. I'll put in a diagram briefly with the different parts of the garden to help explain where we use things and why. The entire garden is surrounded by a double 4-foot tall fence with 4 feet in between. It's meant to be a moat to keep the deer out. It was also going to be a dog run. The main body of the garden is comprised of these beds that are edged in concrete block. They are 7 feet wide. They have a little strip of wood chips down the middle as an access path, and then in between them we have permanent walkways of wood chips to allow for access to these permanent raised beds. And then on the north end of our garden I have these soon-to-be perennial beds. They're currently empty. I haven't planted them yet, but this will be full of perennials like raspberries and blueberries, and this area surrounding them is also going to be our chicken area, kind of a chicken compost yard. The first I'll go through is roofing paper, the second is cardboard, third wood chips, fourth is builder's paper, and then last will be black plastic tarps. Starting with the roofing paper, that is what you can see below. This is this gorgeous roofing paper. We started with this candidly because it was free. We had quite a bit left over after the construction of our house. Because it is literally designed not to let water through, that's its job in life, is to be part of your roof, protecting your sheathing. It does not break down when it gets wet, and that has made it a very nice, really durable layer that's prevented weeds from coming up. It absolutely blacks out everything underneath it. And I do recommend using this in pathways. It comes in the form of one long continuous roll, and that makes it easy to lay down and not have seams where weeds can break through. Cons: normally you would have to buy it. It's not crazy expensive, but it is something you would have to purchase. The second con is it is prone to tearing, and so if you look down here, this is a decent example. This was an edge that lifted up and tore. So this doesn't dissolve in water, but if it's left exposed like this for long periods of time, it will tear, and as that happens, weeds can break through. Consequently, I recommend that as soon as you can, you cover it with something like wood chips, which will be the third one that I talk about. The other con of roof paper, just to be clear, it is a petroleum product. It is impregnated with asphalt, and that is why it is impervious to water. Depending on how you feel about the use of petroleum products in your garden, this might give you more pause. I did a lot of research, a bunch of university papers, etc. I could find no evidence that it ever leaches into the groundwater or into the soil. But if this is a worry for you, you might want to use building paper instead. I'll talk about that one in a little bit. The second layer we put down in these walkways was cardboard. And we used the cardboard for 2 reasons. First, we wanted to have kind of a double layer underneath these concrete blocks that make up the borders of the bed. The edges are really prone to weeds coming up, and layering up the 2 gave us that extra protection. The padding of the cardboard also helped to prevent tearing on the roof paper. So the CMU concrete blocks have these sharp edges, and we didn't want the paper to tear against them. Having the cardboard in between the 2 meant that we didn't have to worry as much about that tearing happening. The second place that we used cardboard was down the middle of the beds. I have these little wood chip aisles down the center of each bed. I was worried about weeds coming up from underneath, and consequently we put down a layer of cardboard underneath those wood chips as well. The real place though where I would recommend using cardboard is whenever you're trying to establish a new bed. And I had a good example outside of our garden in a triangular space between the gate between our front and backyards and the gate into the garden. Ended up with this little sliver of dirt that we knew was just going to become kind of a weedy area. We laid down cardboard first as a barrier, put soil on top of that, and then I planted a wildflower mix of native plants onto that soil. The nice thing about cardboard is that it does dissolve in water. It's pretty thick, it takes some time, and it does act as a nice barrier in the meantime. It'll kill the things underneath it, but it does dissolve, break down, and become eventually part of your soil. If you're going to be planting something above and you want those roots to be able to grow in an unrestricted way, cardboard is a much better choice than something like roof paper would be. Third, wood chips. These are free. That's one of the great things about them. They also are great for managing water. You can tell where I have these tarps, I've ended up with these puddles of standing water. Where I've got the wood chips, whenever we've had heavy rains, the water percolates down through it, the surface dries out quickly, and it allows for a nice, comfortable walking surface, but it also retains the water underneath and allows for some of that water to leach sideways through the soil of the garden. So wood chips are great for water management. part of the reason I've used them as those strips down the centers of the bed. When we have a heavy rain event, those wood chips can saturate with water that can then gradually leak back out into the body of those raised beds. Wood chips will not prevent weeds unless they are very, very thick. And that's important to keep in mind because these wood chips do break down over time. When I first poured them in these pathways, they were level with the tops of the block. And you can see over time they've broken down quite a bit and compressed to the point where they're now maybe only an inch or an inch and a half thick. And this on its own would not prevent weeds very well at all. The function they're really playing here is just to physically protect the roof paper and make sure that it doesn't tear or break. Wood chips are great for that. My caveat on wood chips is you're going to need a lot of them, way more than you think, like 2-3 times as many. In my case, for this garden, I need probably the equivalent of 9 or 10 large trees chipped up just to cover the walkways. Where I am going to rely on the wood chips alone is in these perennial beds. You can probably tell I have not done much to manage weeds in them to date. I tend to just pull things up and throw them and let them decompose in place. When I am ready to plant these with the perennials, I will put in a full 2 feet of wood chips in this bed and allow that to be breaking down a little bit over time. I'll top it off with compost and plant into the compost. That depth alone should prevent any weeds from coming up. I will not need to put cardboard or any kind of paper on the bottom of this. You can plant straight into this. The fact that it's 2 feet deep and nothing on the bottom means that plant roots can go as deep as they want to go. The downside is 2 full feet of wood chips is a lot of carbon and no nitrogen. When I plant these perennials, I will need to put down a layer of nitrogen in between some of the wood chips and allow that to compost over time to make sure that those plants have some form of nitrogen available to them. Otherwise, the wood chips will really lock up that nitrogen. Fourth, building paper. This product here is similar to roofing paper, but it is not a petroleum product. It is simply paper. It is treated with nothing. And so the good news is, if you're worried about petroleum exposure, this will not be a problem. Because I plan to have our chickens in here next year in this area, they will be doing what chickens do and scratching and digging and looking for bugs. If I had roofing paper down here, I'm fairly certain over time they would dig it up and potentially ingest it, and I didn't want to risk that. Instead, I'm using the builder paper. The bad news is it will break down over time in water. It is not in any way resistant to water. And so this is really a temporary measure. You can kind of tell I've put it over here because I really don't walk in this area right now. And this area behind me will eventually also receive the builder paper, but I'm not even trying to put it in place now because we are actively coming in and out of this shed all the time. And the builder paper would completely shred and break down. There's really no point in putting it in place. For now, we're going to rely on these sheets of oriented strand board, and I'm only putting the builder paper in the walkways and the aisles where I know we're not going to be walking much until I can get it covered with wood chips. Once I have another load of wood chips and I have enough to finish the space, I will go ahead and put down builder paper in this area too, and then cover the whole thing with wood chips. Last is the type of mechanical weed cover that is not left in place, and that is black plastic tarps. If you saw my prior video on my alfalfa cover crop that was a total failure, it was a failure because I did not control for weeds and existing grass pressure. This is my kind of take 2. This bed still has the black plastic tarp on it, and I will quickly go through the pros and the cons on the black tarps. Con, you do have to buy this one as well. Things like, the cardboard and the wood chips are usually free, but something like a black plastic tarp, you are going to have to go buy it. They're not crazy expensive, and with a little bit of minimal care, they can be reused over and over again. So it was not, for me, a bad investment. They're really good for doing large areas at once. So because this is a single large sheet of plastic with no seams or edges for light to get through or weeds to come up, you can use them to kill an entire area of weeds all at once. And that's what I did in this bed to my right. I left the tarp in place for close to a month, and when I peeled it back, all of the heavy grass pressure from before was completely gone. I then raked that smooth to get a good seed bed and break up the soil a bit, put down my cover crop, raked that in, and watered it well. It's now covered with insect row cover. This is not for any weed control reasons. I just need to make sure that the birds don't come in and eat my cover crop seed. I mentioned when I was describing this moat that it was originally planned as a dog run. That has changed for 2 reasons. First, the dog in question is an insanely clingy golden retriever, and he loses his mind if he has to be in the dog run while I'm in the garden. Nothing except being directly next to me will be satisfactory. So it wasn't a big hit. Second, we left it with just grass inside of the dog run, and it started to get weedy, and it was really resulting in a lot of weed pressure coming in from outside of the garden and infiltrating these walkways. As I have taken the black tarps off of the cover crop beds, you can see I'm using it in this space instead to immediately come in and smother everything that's inside of this run. I'm going to repurpose this next year as a chicken run instead, kind of an extension of their yard that they can get out into and run around. And my goal, much like I knocked back the grass before putting in this cover crop, my goal for the run is to knock back all of this grass and then plant it with a forage blend for the chickens of different cover crops like flax. This is a good example of being able to reuse these tarps over and over again. My one kind of caveat on that one is it is insanely messy. You will get covered in mud, be prepared. But for me, it was worth it to hopefully knock back all of the pressure in this moat and end up with a nice functional area for the chickens next year. In summary, for those 5 types of mechanical, non-chemical weed controls, roof paper, great for walkways, really, really solid weed control. It is not something that you would use any place that you intend to plant directly into because of the fact that roots cannot penetrate it. Cardboard, I would say, is best used for preparing new beds for planting. You can plant into it, unlike the roofing paper. Wood chips are great, they're free. Overall, I would not think of them on their own as a viable method of weed control because of the depth that is required. I would think of them as something that you use as an addition to things like roof paper, builder paper, or cardboard to provide physical protection and to prevent breaking the barrier that's controlling your weeds. Fourth, building paper, same as roofing paper. I think it's really great for walkways or aisles to prevent weeds from coming up. Much like the roofing paper, and even more so than the roofing paper, it does need something like wood chips on top to protect it from tearing and breaking. And last, black plastic tarps. I would say use these for widespread large areas that you want to completely eliminate weeds out of in a short period of time, but recognize that this is something that you will have to mechanically move around and fuss with quite a bit. But if you're thinking about putting in a cover crop or preparing a bed for planting, they really can be a useful tool for eliminating a lot of weeds in a short period of time. That was it. As always, I hope that is helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And if there are any types or techniques of weed prevention that I didn't mention, please flag it and I might try it out the next time I take out weeds in the garden. Until next time, thanks.